I would argue that's largely a function of the data and analytics failure to drive meaningful value, right? If the stuff in your store sucks, people can and will go build their own store, right? They'll go buy their own solution, right? Data democratization, I think, is an interesting concept. When I think about that through the lens of a product person, which is kind of my core, my kernel with a K, my kernel is product management. And when I think about data democratization through that lens, I think it's reasonable to assume that a certain population would be okay with self-service. There's a certain number of people who want to walk into a grocery store and go to the bulk spice section and fill their own spice.
Welcome to Data Heads Podcast. We're super excited to have with us Malcolm Hawker. Malcolm joins us here with over 25 years in the data and analytics space. His experience is so prolific that he has led and consulted some of the world's largest data organizations in data and analytics. In addition to that, he's currently the CDO of Prophecy, where he hosts his data podcast. In addition to his data podcast, he's continuing to contribute back to the community by attending conferences where he is frequently asked to speak at. Lastly, Malcolm Hawker has just released the Data Hero Playbook, a book I highly recommend to anybody that's looking for actionable ways to drive value in an organization. So thank you, Malcolm, for joining us on Data Heads Podcast. Just super excited to have you here and looking forward to your up-and-coming book, Data Heroes book, correct?
Data Hero Playbook. Close.
Data Hero Playbook.
Data Hero Playbook, yeah.
And so for the audience, would you mind just kind of giving us like a capstone elevator pitch for the book and what instigated you to start writing that?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks a lot for having me. I'm looking forward to our discussion. We've had a couple of discussions in the past, and they've been really lively and lots of great topics. So looking forward to replicating that today as we record the chat. Hopefully, the magic continues. And thanks for the mention about the book. I'm super excited. The Data Hero Playbook really tells a story of how we got to where we are in the world of data and analytics. And it tells a story of the power of something known as a growth mindset. So a few years back, a Stanford PhD named Carol Dweck wrote a book called Mindset, the Secret of Success for Corporations. And in that book, Dweck talks about the power of what she calls a growth-centric mindset, which is this idea that kind of learning comes first and foremost, and adaptability is critical, and focus on customer success, and all the things we need to do to once and for all have data and analytics become a lever of innovation in our organizations, become a lever of growth, become something that can absolutely transform our organizations. When we look at our performance writ large, there's a lot of data out there that suggests, sadly, that the data and analytics function is not necessarily meeting its full potential within a lot of companies. We see data all the time talking about how there's a really high turnover rates with CDOs. We see data that suggests that only 24% of companies consider themselves data-driven. We see data that suggests that companies are having a hard time with things like data governance. There's tons of data points to suggest that we're not really meeting our full potential from the perspective of being data-driven, using data as a lever of innovation, using data to transform how we operate. The opportunities here are massive, particularly because of AI. And my book sets out to answer the question of what do we need to do differently as data practitioners, as data leaders, as data aficionados, from the perspective of how we look at our roles, how we look at our data, and how we look at our customers for data to become a driver of transformation within our organization. So I answer the question of what do we need to do differently to become data heroes?
Oh, awesome. I love that. And so then effectively you've identified, and I'm assuming like there's like I think Harvard Business Review has wrote a number of articles on the CDO having like a 2-year lifespan, if that. And of the executive board members, right, they have the shortest lifespan. And they cite the reason is due to the driver of value, right? And we kind of had that same conversation. And you're saying that it's that the value is also just driven through effectively like being that innovator, being that growth spectrum, identifying the actual proper things to work on, and then properly communicating those things, right?
Yeah. So depending on who you ask, there's data to suggest that the average CDO tenure is about 18 to 24 months. So not even a
Not
full
even 2 years. Yeah.
not even a full 2 years. Now there's a lot of people who will give a whole bunch of different answers to that, including CDOs themselves. So Gartner does a CDO survey every year. They're on their 8th version of it. I think I would consider it kind of the gold standard when it comes to, getting the perspective of CDOs. And if you ask them, what are your biggest roadblocks? And Gartner asks this every year, and they have since the beginning of the survey. If you ask, what are your biggest roadblocks? The CDOs will say, it's these 8 to 9 things. Now, interestingly, Ian, you talked about value and inability to articulate or quantify value. If you ask me, that's the number one reason. But value is never cited in those 9 key reasons for why CDOs are having a hard time succeeding, for the biggest barriers that CDOs see in their way. They don't say, hey, well, our inability to quantify value is our major biggest roadblock. What they say are all, I would argue, are all symptoms of an inability to quantify value. For example, a lack of a data-driven culture. This is consistently number one, number two, or number three. Lack of a data-driven culture or lack of a data
Right.
culture. Putting aside, I'm not entirely sure what that really means. I mean, I do conceptually. It largely means that the business isn't using data to make decisions. I would challenge that notion. I would challenge it with every breath that I have in my body, because I don't know any marketer, any procurement person, any finance person, any HR person that doesn't want more and better data. We all want more and better data, and they're using data one way or the other. I can guarantee you they're using data, but that's almost always number one, is a data-driven culture. Number two, or number three, sadly, is this idea of data literacy. Basically saying, hey, my customers are illiterate, which I think is or data illiterate, which is a highly problematic and extremely judgmental way to look at your customer relationships. But
Right.
that aside, number three, lack of stakeholder engagement, lack of support, lack of commitment. There's all sorts of flavors of things that all suggest. They all largely suggest two things. One is that we as data leaders are unable to articulate the value. Because if I was able to articulate and say to you, Ian, I can give you a report, and if I give it to you, I know that you will double your revenue. Would you use the report? Rhetorical. Of course you would, right? I'd say to you,
Right.
hey,
Yeah.
you're going to double your
Absolutely.
revenue. Right. Of course you would. Um, so that's one thing, right? Like if we were able to articulate our value, so that's one critical aspect here. The other critical aspect of all of these key roadblocks, if you look across all of them, there's one thing they have in common. That is, they all kind of loosely tie to value. And the other thing that they have in common is that they blame everybody else other than the CDO, right? They look at what a psychologist would call for an external locus of control, where it's others, the actions of others, the behaviors of others, the thoughts of others are the primary influence for my lot in life, right?
Right.
My tenure is short. And why? Because they don't get it. They don't go to governance committee meetings. They don't care about data quality. They aren't using the 300 dashboards that I build them every month. Them. That ethos is the core of my book, right? That idea that it's everybody else, it's not me, it's everybody else,
Right.
is kind of the underlying premise. Because if you had a growth mindset, you'd say to yourself, gee, tenures are low. Wow. Why? What do I need to do differently? How can I grow as a professional? How can I be more customer focused? How can I provide more insight? How can I provide more value? Because obviously I'm not doing something right, right? Sorry, I'm on a mini rant here because I'm really
No,
passionate about
I
this.
love it.
But same thing is true with data literacy, right? It's if your customers aren't using your product, right? If you build a product, whatever it is, let's say it's a phone, right? Or it doesn't matter, and you launch it, and people don't use it, they don't buy it. The Yelp reviews are horrible, right? 2-star
Right.
review, right? On Amazon, nobody likes it. It's hard to use. They don't renew their subscription. Whatever those indicators are, are you more likely to say, oh, gee, I guess we missed some requirements. I guess the product sucks, right? Or are you more likely to say, it's them. They don't get it. They
Yeah,
don't see
these
the value
users
of
don't
data.
understand the value of this phone.
They just don't understand.
Yeah.
They're illiterate. I
Yeah.
mean, these poor helpless folks they just don't understand the genius of my pie chart.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you think about things through that lens, things get kind of ridiculous pretty quick, right? If nobody's using your product or don't like the product or find it too hard to use, or they can't read the labels of your product, then you need to work on your product. It's such a natural conclusion. But in the world of data, we say, this must be them.
Yeah, it's not just working on your product. It's aligning your product with what the customer wants, right? And so like, who produces a product and doesn't do consumer feedback? Who doesn't work and do whole pilots where they have peer feedback and they're doing these what are those groups called where they like test the product? Focus groups, right? Well, I mean, if for the audience, like, when was the last time you did a focus group with the business? Right?
It's such a great question. It's funny you should mention that because I have a large portion of one of my chapters in my book where I tell some stories about the focus groups that we used to do when I was running a product function. So before I fell down the data and analytics rabbit hole, I was a chief product officer. I ran a product function. I had a product team. I hired and retained and mentored product managers.
Right.
And we used to do, this was when I was working at a software startup in Austin, Texas. And we used to do all of our UX, user experience, all our usability stuff in this UX lab in Dallas. So we would drive up to Dallas and it was just like double pane glass, right? Like the frosted glass. We'd sit on one side of the glass and we would like literally kind of stand over the shoulder of people, not only seeing what they were seeing on the screen, because this was like software UIs, right? We were trying to like make a really intuitive, easy to use UI. And we'd hear people and we would say, okay, can you do this task? And then go try to do this task. And we'd watch, right? And then we would listen. And there'd be somebody in the room, a facilitator in the room, and they're like, oh, okay, well, why did you click that? What do you think that? Or, oh, you're frustrated now. Why? Because I don't understand that label. This doesn't make any sense to me. Or I don't get it. Or this doesn't make any, like, it's like, and that was a back and forth, highly iterative thing. Now, don't get me wrong. If you are, building I use the word pie chart, right? But if you're building a fairly, like a gross revenue report, right? I mean, do we need training on what gross revenue actually means? But the point here is what you mentioned. The point here is that you need to understand how your product is being used. You need to understand who your users are. The behavior of a CEO is going to be very different than, a young person an analyst who like maybe inherently knows data or knows Excel. So different requirements for different users. But that's kind of my point, which is, okay, well, if people don't like the product and they're not using the product and they're complaining about it, chances are pretty good it's the product.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's, are you solving the problem that they need resolved?
Yeah.
Right. And I really love and used this analogy of like setting up meetings on people's calendars, business stakeholders, that says the magic wand. And then you just ask them, if you had a magic wand to make your life incredibly easy, what, like for your work, right, for your department, what would that be? If you could just wave it and then now all of a sudden, whatever problem it is, assuming, let's use AI, for example, could truly do anything, what would that be? And it may not get something that you can produce a product on, but it'll get you to the heart of what their consternations are, the places where they have the greatest hardships. And that gets you to a place where you can figure out, oh, like this data quality issue, if I just focus on this and I nailed that one, I don't have to worry about implementing a whole massive like data governance or data cleansing tool and process and all that. I just need to nail that one and bridge success with that and be able to quantify the value that drove to that department. And all of a sudden you're a success, right? Now the tools obviously get us there, but it's like focus on solving one good business problem. right? And with the right stakeholder, and you're made, right? And it seems like it's just, it is very IT-esque in the sense of we will build it because it's interesting. And I think that there's Bill Inman kind of did an article where he was talking about like how data teams have really been like incentivized on learning the latest and greatest tools because the driver for them is a higher salary. And at the next year and a half mark, they put that on their resume and all of a sudden they're earning another 10 to 30% pay increase. And so then as they go through their career, right, it's always just about building the next coolest thing, not the thing that drives the greatest value, because their incentive is to learn the latest and the greatest and earn that extra pay bump, right? And so there has been this fiscal value proposition within data teams to learn the latest and greatest tools, bringing in, I mean, how many people have you seen in your career that did the straight resume build and brought in a tool for the express reason of just putting it on their resume that they did a XYZ implementation? I'm not going to say a brand, but you get my point, right? Like, it's just like, there's been an internal focus, and then now these people come into senior leadership and they have to now pivot from the latest and greatest tool to driving value as a business partner. And I think it's nothing against the data community. It's just the fact that we've been incentivized so much to focus on the latest technology and the development of it and doing the coolest whiz-bang thing that builds that next resume for that next 20-30% pay bump, that now we have to kind of start pivoting back as AI is coming in, right? It's like, you want to do the latest and greatest, well, you need good data, right? And so it's going to be interesting to see how these next couple of years, what are your thoughts on that, on how AI may end up pushing the data community and culture towards a business-centric, customer-centric product value? What are your thoughts? I mean, I know you're writing the book on it. Your hope is to kind of help steer the community, but do you feel like it's going to drive us towards, away? I mean, what are your anticipations in that respect?
Well, so first of all, I fully agree with everything you just said. From the perspective of, unhealthy obsession on technology, from the perspective of misaligned incentives, and I talk a lot in my book about misaligned incentives, right, where the incentive is to deploy technology and not drive, value creation and not solve problems for customers, not be, rapidly focused on customer success. And I also talk about perhaps one way out of that is through this idea of tying your incentives to actual business performance, right? Could we, and you interesting, when you first started talking, you said, could I wave a magic wand? I like thought exercises like that because they open your mind to thinking creatively, right? Instead of thinking about, I've got an answer, they open your mind to thinking creatively. And I use them a number of times in my book. One of the times that I use them is I ask the question, and I posit it as a thought exercise, and I say, what if you had to run a data and analytics function as a profit and loss, as a P&L?
Yeah,
maybe even think of it as like a store, right? Like if you actually had to run a data store or the report shop, right? Like, and you ran the report shop and you depended on people coming through your door and buying stuff out of your store and being happy with it, right? Like you could kind of laugh and say, well, okay, well, but there's a lot of things inherent to that, including customer satisfaction, including being able to put a price tag on what you actually sell in your store. And to do that, you would actually have to understand what things cost as well. So there's a cost component, and then there's the customer value component. The delta is profit. Yay. So I like the kind of the use of thought exercises. I like what you talked about from the perspective of, yes, incentives are misaligned. But the missing thread here, I would argue, is that we've known these things for a while, right? Like we've been saying for literally decades, we focus way too much on technology. And when I was a Gartner analyst, I was saying this all the time. Hey, don't focus on technology, people, process, and technology, right? We got to focus on the people stuff. We got to focus on the process stuff, process excellence. And my clients would be like, yep. And then I'd ask them 6 months later, oh, hey, how is that focus on improving your overall data governance process? How are things moving, from the perspective of, having lunch once a week or once a month with all of your key stakeholders? How are those things going? But we deployed a new something.
Yeah.
Right. So we'd see it all the time. But so the missing part, there are enabling pieces, of course. I think changing our incentive structure is important. I think changing our operating models is certainly important. I would think hiring new people is actually really important. Hiring people like product managers who get it is really important. So there are things that I talk about in my book that are going to help enable us along the way. But until we change the way that we think about our customers, and I use that word purposefully, customers, until we start thinking differently about our customers, until we start thinking differently about our roles and our data, I would argue a lot of the things that we've been doing will continue to fail. Will AI help or hinder? Great question. I think at current course and speed, AI will automate and accelerate a lot of our dysfunction. Unfortunately, right?
So it's going to take us in the wrong direction faster.
It could, right? Yeah. It could if I'm right, and I don't want to be right necessarily, but if I'm right that things like our operating models, like our core kind of the operating principles, the fundamental principles of how we operate, if those are askew, right? And we layer, meaning, here's a good example. What do I mean by askew? That we are focused on technology, not customer success. That would be one example. That we're focused on the rules and not the outcomes. That would be another example of how we might be askew, and how our processes, our technologies, our people are all aligned to operating principles that are askew, that aren't focused on the business succeeding, but they're focused on maybe self-preservation, maybe more technology, maybe an incentive that has nothing to do with business performance. If the things that we are doing are aligned to that, augmenting that and automating that, one could argue that could make things worse in the long run. I'm particularly concerned with, and I've used the phrase operating model, and I just used the phrase operating principles. One could say this is our broader data strategy as a whole. One could argue, I think, compellingly, that everything that we've been doing, now this is through the lens of discussion about AI specifically, one could argue that everything we've been doing is largely built around an assumption that we live and breathe in a highly deterministic world, right?
Okay.
Meaning we could build a rule, right? And we build data quality rules. We build matching rules. We build all sorts of rules. We build integration patterns. All sorts of things that are highly deterministic. If then, right? That it's 0 or a 1. It's one or the other. It's good quality or it's bad quality, right? It's very binary, right? It's either the report is accurate or it's inaccurate,
right?
I think you could argue that a lot of how we think about data, a lot of what we do, a lot of our incentive structures, a lot of our operating model, or a lot of our organizational structures are based on that operating premise. If AI doesn't work that way, and it's inherently probabilistic, and instead of the answer being yes or no, 0 or 1, the answer is maybe, right? It might be this under this circumstance, but it could be this under this circumstance.
Got it, yeah.
It's a totally different way of looking at the world. At least Gen AI, not classic machine learning, classic kind of regressions and more, natural language processing, arguably. But at least Gen AI seems to behave in a way that doesn't align at all to how we kind of look at the world through classic data and analytics lenses. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, as much as it was a difficult question for you, I don't know that I'm formulating an opinion as you're stating these things, and I guess one of my thoughts is to kind of be the contrarian would be, what happens when the business starts feeding themselves and citizen developers actually become a reality? Now all of a sudden, getting the latest and greatest tech stack is no longer the incentive for the data developer. Um, and that's one of the things I've been postulating is what happens if true citizen developers type start to occur? And if that does happen, then the business analysts and business stakeholders will end up starting to kind of roll over a lot of data roles. And if that occurs, the way that we preserve the data community is by teaching them things like your book.
Yeah.
Here's how you actually move towards value. I think that we're hitting kind of a inflection point where the data community will start to obsolete themselves. I mean, we talk about like data literacy and data culture and things of that nature. And if you look at the average business analyst today relative to 10 years ago, right? I think we expect too much too fast, right? And if you just take like the random Joe who's messed with AI, their volume and understanding of things on the data side tends to be greater, right? Their ability to like, oh, I just figured out, I heard Python does this, and I just asked ChatGPT to build this for me from this CSV, and you're like, shoot, okay. And that's what I mean, like, as people start to self-service themselves, now, we all know what happens when you get into that environment. A lot of inaccuracies start to bubble up, and so there'll kind of be like a counter swing maybe. I don't know, that's why I'm still like torn. Like, there's going to be like, no, we need that data quality. They're going to end up going so disastrously wrong on self-service that comes this like pendulum swing back. Okay, no, we really do need these good data engineers and data governance analysts and things of that nature. But I don't know. I don't know that I have like a solid opinion. I feel very squishy on the matter of like where things go, but I can see it almost being organizationally. And not so much a broader trend, if that makes sense. I think each organization has enough of its own culture to kind of delineate which direction that's going to go.
So putting aside the idea of kind of AI assisted hyper, decentralization, hyper federation, right?
Right.
Which may be true, by the way. Because you already mentioned something else that is true, which is this accordion or this pendulum that constantly is swinging between centralization, decentralization,
Right.
decentralization. I've seen that pattern at least 7 times in the 30 plus years that I've been in this space. It keeps happening over and over again. I would argue that's largely a function of the data and analytics failure to drive meaningful value, right? If the stuff in your store sucks, people can and will go build their own store.
Absolutely.
Right? They'll go buy their own solution, right? Data democratization, I think, is an interesting concept, and I think when I think about that through the lens of a product person, which is kind of my core, my kernel with a K. My kernel is product management. And when I think about data democratization through that lens, I think it's reasonable to assume that a certain population would be okay with self-service. There's a certain number of people who want to walk into a grocery store and go to the bulk spice section and fill their own spice bag, right? There's a certain population that want to do that, and
they'll never go away, no matter where they go.
No, they never go away, and they're happy to do it because they know the spices, and maybe they can make their own combos on the fly. They know how to do that, and they're that's great. They'll go do that. But there's a whole other section of people that don't want to do that. Right. And as a product person, as a data product person, as a CDO, I should be able to support both of them. So this is a roundabout way of saying, if we go all in on data democratization, that's not the answer necessarily, because to me, that's not customer centric.
I agree.
Abdicating building great products is not the answer either. Allowing the hyper federation, the kind of hyper decentralization is not the answer either, because it's not an either or. And we know this to be true as well. data kind of domain-driven designs and domain-driven anything are great for the domain. If your domain happens to be anything lower than cross-functional or enterprise-wide. One way to look at this, there's kind of 3 layers of this cake: functional, cross-functional, enterprise-wide, right?
Right.
And when you federate, what you're saying is AI could use it. People in marketing will just go do their own thing. Finance does their own thing. It's basically the data mesh on steroids. Okay. They'll go do their own thing, and somehow magically, pixie dust falls, doves are released, angels sing. Somehow magically, all those domains will just work together to solve cross-functional use cases because they want to. I don't know, but they won't, because there's no incentives for them to do that, right?
Yeah.
Those incentives exist at higher levels of the organization, right? The CFO needs to make sure that the financial reports are correct so she doesn't get sued or audited, right?
Of course, yeah.
And does the chief revenue officer care about that? Not that much. I mean, they do, but because if the company goes down, they don't get their bonus, but they don't really care that much. So, hyper federation, ultra domain driven designs, okay, fine for the domains, but this is one shift of the pendulum.
Right.
But we cannot leave behind the other things. We cannot leave behind these cross-functional requirements. We can't say to the CFO, if she asks, how many customers do we have? We can't say, it depends. Who's asking? Well, okay, the CFO is asking. There can only be one answer to that question.
Right.
So what will AI do in this world? I honestly think, Ian, that AI will be the only way, once we figure all of this out, once we actually start looking at data and analytics through the lens of a product, right? And through product and process excellence, once we become these data heroes I'm talking about.
Right.
Once we figure that out, we will come to the conclusion that to do governance, to do data and analytics the right way, we need AI. And why do I say that? Well, that's because the right way to govern and manage data is to be contextually aware, meaning we need to know how the data is being consumed. And the governance rules for marketing are necessarily different than the governance rules for finance, which are necessarily different than the governance rules for the CFO, right? This is what Gartner would call adaptable data governance. And I'm not just talking about data governance. Well, that's kind of the foundation. These are data management practices, right? The way we manage data for one consumer, and this is a very product and customer-centric way of looking at the world, the way we manage and govern data for one consumer is different than another. It just makes sense, right? This is I want to mix my own spices versus just give it to me prepackaged and I'm good to go. If we acknowledge these things to be true, if we acknowledge them to be customer-centric, and if we acknowledge that that's the best way to deliver value for those customers, then we necessarily need to govern and manage the data according to the customer need, right? So this is a drastically different way of looking at the problem. And I would argue that that AI is the only way that we're going to be able to do any of this stuff at scale. Because right now, like, we have a hard time defining rules for for one set of customers, let alone N sets of customers.
So then, if I'm hearing you correctly, and maybe this is my own tilt, and so maybe I'm not hearing you correctly, but it sounds like what you're saying is kind of a department-specific data catalogs are the future of the input into AI to making everything work.
Or the output, or both. Here's
well, yeah. I mean, I could see that being an output for sure, but it is a necessity to sit on top of some sort of semantic layer,
absolutely.
Whatever that may be, and that's why I was alluding to this idea of like this self-service, because if you get proper data catalogs, right, and anymore. Most organizations, right, or most software providers are producing data dictionaries, right, with their organic pieces. And so then all it takes is updating a handful of records in those source systems with definitions for the newly added fields that are specific to the organization. And you have like a bare bones data catalog from all your source systems you stitch those together and have some minor data contracts, and you have a loose semantic model that's able to basically have a LLM organizationally specific. And that's kind of what I was alluding to in this idea of like, hey, when those pieces come together, all of a sudden self-service becomes scary. And that's where I was talking about this idea of like, where does the data community go in that capacity? And do they end up becoming just jockeys that kind of are running around making sure that the source system's data quality is done and establishing those rules and leveraging AI tools? Or is there more to that? Like, and that's what I was kind of getting at is like, if they can't perceive the value to the end consumer, then will they end up getting it themselves once that corner's turned?
Yeah, without a doubt. So
Right.
without a doubt, they will. Now, between now and then, I don't know how long that time is between where we are and what you just described, but I think arguably what you just described is inevitable, right? And that's okay, right? Because somebody has to implement and deploy and manage those technologies. So whether it is a small language model, I don't know whether it's a combination of them in some sort of like, agentic workflow where
that's what I would imagine.
The small army of agents is going out there and doing things like building reports on the fly, where it is like building hierarchies and ontologies on the fly. Maybe it is, or making modifications to them on the fly, based on how they know data is either generated or consumed or both. Like that's where we're going. And that's arguably what is needed. There is a little bit of a paradox here in that in order, and this gets to the idea of being AI ready, whatever the hell that means, AI ready. In order to govern the data at scale for consumption by AI-based processes, the only way that we will get there is to use AI-based processes to do it.
Okay.
Here's an example, right? How do I define a customer? Okay, today, that is, can be a rather painful process if you're trying to figure out the one definition to rule them all.
Of course, yeah.
Right, and you and I have probably sat through far too many meetings than we care to even remember, where everybody sits around a table and argues about the customer definition, right? And I've been there. I've like literally lost days of my life I'll never get back listening to these arguments where finance is saying one thing and marketing is saying another, and they're both right. And we're trying to circle that square somehow because it's the CFO that's driving and signing the checks. And the CFO says, I don't care, come up with a definition. We implement the definition. Marketing doesn't like it, so they go do whatever they want on their own anyway. It's the democratization you talked about. Everybody's marginally unhappy, but finance gets what they want. There's, that's good enough. Well, in a world where there are 10, I don't know, just throwing a number out there, 10 different customer definitions, and they're all valid for that given use case, right? For how that data needs to be used. You need to manage all of those, which arguably suggests that there are 10 or 10 to the X number of different kind of customer-centric hierarchies and customer-related ontologies. Right, customers related to product, located to material, related to location, related to, and each of those, like this, things get exponential here fairly quickly. And the idea that a human being, or even a team of human beings, with the title of data steward or data governor, or data owner, whatever that means, could figure all of that stuff out at scale, in real time, right? Literally at runtime, not happening.
Yeah,
not happening.
I mean, at that point in time, it's identifying the user, and then the contextual question, right? But point of clarification, and more specifically for the audience, you and I have used customer to the parody of your comment about the definition of customer. We've used it interchangeably as to the data department's customer being the business stakeholders. Yes. And in this latest context, we were using it in the definition of the business defining customer within the organization as the end consumer of that organization's products.
Thank you for the disclaimer. I'm laughing not because there isn't humor in what you're saying. There actually is a little bit of humor there, but I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, and I make a lot of posts about LinkedIn where I think I come up with like these, like just these nuggets of grandiose insight, right? That may be related to customer value or organizational structure or incentives or something. And I'll make I'll say something that is semantically confusing or inconsistent, right? Like I'll trip up in my language, right?
Right.
In my post, right? And my post could be about like, I've solved world hunger, right?
Right.
But if I say something in it for the data, for my community, for my user group, if I say something in it that just is like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. He said, I don't know, one thing and he meant another. An example is that I said, I made a post the other day about the topic of semantics. And I said, here's a great irony, right? It's just so ironic. It's fantastic. I said semantics is about the meaning of things. And somebody said, no, it's actually not about the meaning of things. It's about the labels that we give to things, or it was, I even forget the exact, but it was like this nuancy twist.
Yeah. So he's being getting on
Yes.
semantics of the
Well,
word
exactly.
semantics.
I was like, this is so meta, right? Like, but it was about the, like why semantics are important and what, and that this is why, because AI needs semantics and we need context, and this is all about context, and context is king. And I made a trip up in how I defined it, and then there was like this rabbit hole in all these like just that's our community, man. It's like meaning and definitions, and if
So what's funny is like so much is lost in just raw text, right? I hate like texting on the phone.
Yeah.
And that person was probably making like a phenomenal pun, and like it's just like up for the reader to decide, like, was that a joke or was he actually being like that guy who we know in the data community is like that.
Yeah.
And so
there's a lot of us out there. There's a lot of there's a lot of purists. Language is important, semantics is important. I find it fascinating, but I do happen to believe, and this is a little heretical, right? I've already suggested this more than once, but I do happen to believe that AI will help us largely automate data governance. And I'm not talking like security and access, like which a lot of analytics people, like the people that just live like hardcore analytics type, that are just like the reporting people.
Okay.
This includes,
and I'm going to have to press on this, so I'm going to have some questions, so keep going.
Okay, but like this includes a lot of like the hardcore Snowflake and Databricks people who think governance is just security and access. Like when you use governance, like they think, oh, who can see what?
Right. It's a privacy issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. But I made a post a couple of weeks ago that said, hey, data definitions are a governance decision, right? How we define something is inherently a governance decision. Governance is about a lot more than just access and security. So I believe that governance will be automated. There's people out there that are like, kind of the data mesh people. We all have our little tribes, right? And the data mesh people are just like, yes, of course it will be automated, and federated automated governance, and then I'm like, okay, well, you mean access and security, right? That's what you mean.
Yeah, and
right? You don't actually mean what I mean.
And this is where I was going to press back on you is, and I feel like I'm probably going to get in trouble, but whatever. I genuinely feel that there's an intrinsic bond between data governance and business process. And so is AI going to automate business process? No.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
You think so?
Oh, without a doubt.
Really?
Without a doubt. Totally agree.
Okay, sell me.
Here we go. All right, hold on. Here we go. I just had this conversation yesterday on my podcast with Bar Moses, who's the CEO of a company called Monte Carlo that does data observability.
Okay.
And we had a high level version of this conversation, which is not exactly the same. But I believe that the data will tell us everything that we need to know, right? The data will tell us. Now, this is not just metadata. This is transactional data. This is just like the corpus of data. If we can build models today that tell us when a subway train is going to fail, or when an elevator is likely to fail, or just pick any IoT process where we have built ML models that can predict the failure of machines, and they can, reasonably accurate as well, right? If we can do that, if we can build models that predict when data pipelines are going to fail, or we can build models that will predict that when business processes are going to fail. We already know this. We can do this. This is just simply a cost benefit thing. It's not is this doable? We're already doing this. We can already model, and we know when a business process will fail. Turn that on its head, right? And we could say, we know when a business process will be optimized. We know what we need to do. We know what the data needs to look like. And there are indicators, there are all sorts of indicators in the data where a business process is suboptimal, right? And where AI will be running Monte Carlo simulations in the background to say, okay, if I did this, what would happen? If I did this, what would happen? If I did this, what would happen? And that's process automation. It's absolutely process automation.
Okay, so I'm 80% sold. So here's the piece that you're gonna need to help me on. Those are very accurate for very fixed organizational processes.
Sure.
But businesses are
dynamic.
Maybe
like a robot making something. Sure. Okay.
Yeah, but businesses are dynamic. And the places where almost every data governance team bashes their head against the wall is the new business process to handle this new exception that either the marketing or the sales department or the product team has come up with that just totally throws a wrench in the predetermined, deterministic process. And that's what I'm talking about, where it's like, I don't know how you can automate that, much less just make it quicker to resolve, right? Like you can get there faster, but it's more of the fact that business is naturally dynamic. And there are organizations that are like very rigid in their process. It's just like, hey, look, we got this and we crank it out. But I would argue most of those are very private organizations, and very kind of almost like entrepreneurial based, because that's what they can manage. Versus the larger you scale out, right, the more you go into something that is that's on stock exchanges or whatever and has some measure of stakeholders and investors, its dynamic nature of go try this, do something this, that is a piece that I feel like creates the largest disruption, because it's those failures of, oh, this didn't work, but we ran this for 6 to 12 months as a way to try it, and then it didn't work, and so we made accommodations here, but then those rules stayed, so then it trips up this new process. And that's where I'm talking, where I think that there's a huge difficulty when you actually are understanding and working with those business partners to understand how messy it is, right? In fact, I recently had a conversation with an individual. We were just talking about like, well, screw this company. They keep doing like a different way to do the same thing every day. It makes it impossible to create something that's deterministic, right? And in that same capacity, it's like, okay, like that is what I'm talking about, is that organic evolution and devolution of a business that is going to be difficult. I think
I totally hear you. I think the limitation there is a human one and not a technical one, right? The idea that this is a snowflake, and no, this is a snowflake. Trust me, this is really a snowflake, and only I, the human, using my infinite knowledge and all of my intuition and all of my experience, could model this in the most optimal way. There's a lot of people who are going to say that, right? And
right, I would. Yeah. I mean, the data warehouse community is that group, right? And don't get me wrong, like I have my massive proclivities towards the data warehouse community, but
well, I've had a number of very interesting and lively debates recently with people in that community around data modeling, and which is kind of the core, right, of that house, right? It's the foundation of the foundation,
of course.
Right? And I think the data modeling is easily modeled, right? Easily automated, I should say, like easily automated. The idea that it is just like some sort of combination of unraveling the Gordian knot and solving for world peace, and plus a little bit of art, plus a little bit of science, plus a little bit of forethought, and only we the humans could ever imagine what it might be in the future. Like the idea that is like this artistic scientific endeavor that only we could do. I mean, come on. I mean, really?
Yeah, I dance the line on both sides on that one.
Well, of course, if you're in a leadership role and you've got, and I am as well. This is a hypothetical philosophical conversation between a couple of data gearheads, and that's fine. If I'm in a leadership position, I understand there's value right now in having extremely skilled, extremely high value data modelers. Don't get me wrong, I get it, right?
Yeah, we're talking future state, right?
Exactly
like,
right. Oh yeah.
And I'm tracking with you. I'm just saying that creating things with the opportunity for future scale does have some measure of artistic nature from the modeling side.
Which is, interestingly, an intuitive endeavor, right? Which, that is wisdom, right? If you follow, there's this useful, this useful framework called the Data Information Knowledge Wisdom, DIKW.
Yeah, and that's the whole. That's from a lot more of like the librarian.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly right. The top of that pyramid is wisdom. And what you just said is, okay, I will distill all of my years of learning. I will intuit, right? I'll infer. I'll do all these things to come up with something that I think is going to be future-proof. Fantastic. That is the domain, the unique domain of humans today, and will be until we ever hit AGI. Who knows? And if we do, though, that all bets are off, man. All bets are off.
Well, yeah, I don't think that's even really on the table for discussion. I mean, because if it is, it's futility, right? Like, why talk about it, right?
Well, yes, arguably, yeah, because it is entirely new playing field. That it's kind of like the other side of the event horizon, right? Like we can talk about it, but we have no idea.
Right. Exactly.
No idea. Zero. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, one thing I did want to bring up to the users, and I meant this with all sincerity. The best LinkedIn post I've seen was yours with the store aisle, and everything is priced at 0, and that is most data teams, and it's almost like a self-respect thing of like, if you can't quantify it, if you can't quantify the value and time of your team, then everybody will steamroll them. Right, and the data teams get steamrolled because they don't put a price tag on what does it actually cost for us to do these things, much less an opportunity cost of it, right? Like, and I think keep in mind, like you said, your kernel, and I loved that analogy because I clicked it and it made sense to me. My kernel was accounting. I started out with accounting and finance, and then moved into data analytics, all that type of stuff. So for me, like, I always think of like cost versus opportunity cost, right? And I think one of the big problems for the data culture, data literacy problems, is that data professionals have not adopted the language of business, which is finance and accounting. And if they do, then they would sit there and produce the actual cost and profit analysis on every initiative that they do and communicate that. And once the business can identify the value or the profit or the cost, right, of any individual data product, right, all of a sudden they pick up the data literacy like that, right? Like, just, it's like, oh, my department produces or impacts this and it has this value. So, I mean, I would challenge most data leaders to say, like, and like, especially in the chief data officer class, is if you can't tell the value of the data, then who can? And
that's exactly right.
So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, and I don't mean this in any political way, it's just by nature of the reality of this, is you can't come into another country speaking a different language and expect everyone else to speak that language and be frustrated when they don't, right? And that the data team does it. It's like, oh, we need to improve data literacy, and we're going to do that by throwing a dictionary at people, and they will like it. And it's like, what? What? No. Uh,
You just pretty much summarized the, a lot of the kind of the core ethos under my book. Everything you just said fully and completely aligns to kind of the core ethos of my book, which is that, you know, values at the core of everything we do. Customers are at the core of everything we do. Providing value should be at the core of everything we do, and we need to think differently about how we do our jobs. Like that's the core. That is the core driving principle of my book. We need to think differently about how I do our jobs. The visual image that I put on LinkedIn, the visual of what I put on LinkedIn of this, like walking into a store and everything having a price tag of 0 is supposed to be jarring, right? It's supposed to make you think about, oh, okay, well, if everything was 0, then I really wouldn't put much value on it. Maybe I would hoard it and stockpile it a lot, right? Maybe I would let it go bad.
yeah.
I'd have no.
I'd buy 100 of these, and then if I
Yeah.
need them, I use them as I need.
Yeah,
Right?
it's exactly right. It creates so many distorted behaviors that just don't fully align to how our businesses operate. The most important one being, I as a data leader cannot tell you the value that my team drives. Right. And this is the antithesis of being data driven, by the way. So not only are we metaphorically walking into somebody else's country and expecting them to speak our language and throwing a dictionary at them, not only that, but we're blaming them.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and it, so we need to think differently about how we approach our jobs. We drastically need to think differently. We need to become customer focused. We need to become rabidly obsessed with customer success. And yeah, we need to start quantifying the value of everything we do, right? And we need to act with a little bit more integrity. If we're going to be the ones out there waving our fingers saying, you're not data driven, you're not data driven, you're not data driven, and that's the top barrier to my success. Meanwhile, I can't tell you, I have no data on the value of my data. Well, that doesn't sound very data driven to me. How do I make decisions about priority? How do I know what to work on and what to not work on? How do I know how many people to hire? How do I know if this investment in a tool is going to drive ROI or not? How do I
Right.
run a business if I can't tell you, at the very least, how much something costs? That's one important piece of the puzzle. But at the very least, how much it costs, but how much value is there generating for customers? If I can't, or if I won't, right? The more accurate way to look at this is I won't, because I can. You can literally you can measure anything, right? If I won't do that, right, as a manager of this business, if I won't tell you how much my stuff costs or how much value I'm driving, well, then I think it's right to question whether that role should be there in the first place.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
Now, there are plenty of people out there, and I hear them all the time. I've had some great, fantastic conversations at conferences and hotel bars, talking about this idea of, well, no, you can't quantify the value of data. You can't do it. It's impossible. It's
my gosh. Yeah,
you can't.
I just had that conversation at the Chief Data Officer magazine event that I went to, and it was like I was telling them how I was writing that book, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't."
Well,
do
right. I've had this conversation recently.
And the guy was just so appalled by what I had to say that he walked away, and I was just like,
but it's just because something might be hard doesn't mean it's impossible. Just because something might create more accountability where it doesn't exist today doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. There are plenty of business functions where the connection between an investment in that function and the delivery of value from that function is non-causal. I'll give you an example. Marketing. Right? Like what's the classic line? Who said it? It's like, 50% of my spend on marketing is effective. I just don't know which 50%. Right? Marketing, all the marketing runs on something known as attribution. What's attribution? Yeah. Well, it's a modeling function. Right? Yeah. It's a modeling function that says, it's an educated guess that says, if I spend $1 on billboard ads, and if I spend $1 on online ads, if I spend $1 on, whatever it is, flyers dropped from a plane, who knows, that's $3. And I have all these touch points, and I think I'm going to touch this person. I think I'm going to touch this person, right? And then I'm going to take a guess that, maybe 5 of these people will convert and 5 people of these can convert. And I will still have a model that attributes those flyers that we're dropping from a plane. How much of that $1 that I spend on that flyer do we confidently attribute to that one closed sale? Is there a causal relationship there? Of course not. Maybe the customer says, I bought your product because the flyer I found on the ground. Maybe, but probably not, right? Our entire marketing function runs on attribution models. The entire thing. Our HR department runs on attribution models.
Right.
If I spend money on trying to recruit and retain employees, right?
Yeah.
Can I say as an HR leader that investing in, who knows, an employee fitness reimbursement, right? We have a fitness reimbursement. That's fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Can I draw a
that
one-to-one?
increased retention 5%.
Well, whatever it is, right? I'm going to try to model it, but can I say with 100% certainty that there's a causal relationship between that fitness reimbursement and the tenure of our employees? Of course I can't, right? The idea that in data and analytics, there needs to be this hard causal line between $1 spent on data and $1 in the bank.
Here's why. And I'm not trying to be like pejorative and like, oh, I know the reason, but data is almost most commonly associated with accounting and finance, and the requirement for very, like you said earlier, binary, this is accurate, this is wrong, right? It's baked into the mentality of a data person, right? And by nature of those that it attracts, it is that very binary, linear, deterministic mentality of a person. And so you have that. And then what they need to do is bridge with a salesperson. So data people are used to presenting reality. Salespeople are used to casting a vision. And if we can start to train the blend of those tools for the data people, it's learn how to be a visionary, learn how to articulate that very concept. Marketing doesn't require a causality value, but they can do an attribution of value.
Of course.
Right? And there's obviously been instances where there have been marketing things that have occurred that had immediate causality, right?
Sure.
And so, but that doesn't mean that those things need to be they can still be framed in a more loose or vision-oriented way.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, if every record in your CRM tomorrow was incorrect, it would have immediate impacts.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Like if every customer email address in your marketing system was wrong, there'd be immediate impacts there. So, yeah, I'm with you. You can absolutely measure this stuff, and the idea that we can't, to me, is an abdication of our responsibility as data leaders. So we need to do better there, and we can do better there. And that is one of the things that, obviously that I advocate for strongly in my book. So, we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I think whenever I can get my book started to be written is a practical guide on how to do some of those more abstract ones.
Love it.
Right?
We need more of that. That when I was a Gartner analyst, I would hear that almost every day. Right? Okay, Malcolm, this is great. Now how? Right? How do I put the shovel in the ground and measuring the data? There's a lot of ways to do it. Right? I've just been talking about kind of like attribution. It's inherently, I would argue, a modeling exercise, but there are ways to triangulate around the impacts of data, whether we're talking about data quality, data, any attribute of data quality, you name it. There are certainly ways to do this. It's not easy, and it'll create far more accountability than you've ever had before. There's no doubt about that. Once you start actually looking at this, when you open that Pandora's box, there's no going back. There's no.
Well, that's the fear that most people, I don't think, want to go down that road.
Right.
What do I do? Fear. Do I show that I'm a cost center?
Yeah, well,
you see my point. Like that's the perception is that if I show all the costs and I am not skilled in presenting the value, then all of a sudden I'm a cost center, and I can't prove otherwise.
You already are. Right. You already are. So
you and I would agree with that, and I think the audience may not trigger what you and I are vibing, and what I mean by that is like. You already are because of your mentality.
Okay, I see. Yeah, all right.
Right? Like the fact that you can't perceive how to attribute value to what you're working on also means you're working on the wrong things. right?
Yeah,
And so then you are a cost center at that point.
of course. Yeah, but you don't have to be. You could be a P&L. I firmly believe it. You could be a P&L.
Yeah,
Without
of course. I'm not saying that you can't be. I'm just saying that that's the state of where you are at. If your mentality is you can't do a determination of the value of the work that you're doing, then I mean,
by definition, yes.
Yeah, I mean, find another place in the world where you can get paid the money that you get paid and not be able to tell them the value that they're driving.
That's okay. Yeah, good question. I'll be thinking about that later tonight.
All right. Well, thank you so much for jumping on. I really appreciate you coming on. I think we also have your book. Your preferred preference of sale is going to be Amazon. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's on pre-order right now. If you search on Amazon Hawker Data Hero, I'm the only thing that comes up.
Okay. I'll be sure to make sure that link is put down in all the places that we have that. You're also at Prophecy as the chief data officer there.
Yeah.
Which also does effectively data management tools. So
Master data management, indeed. Yep.
Yep. And so then, and then you also have your own podcast through Prophecy as well. So
CDO Matters podcast. Every 2 weeks we got other episodes coming out. I'm on the road all the time. If you go to any data-related conference, any major data-related conference, chances are pretty good you'll see me probably on stage. And if you do, come say hi. I'd love to meet you.
All right. Thank you, Malcolm.
Thanks, Ian. Had a lot of fun.